Just heard David Ramadan becoming unhinged, former House of Delegate member Republican from Loudoun County. I don't know what on the world he's talking about. His candidate, Ed Gillespie, won, and somehow he's blaming Ed's ads for losing. I mean, call up Ed. What's that got to do with us? Unbelievable. Unhinged, right? I don't see how a Republican wins Virginia again in my lifetime. Larry Hogan won Maryland. I never thought I'd seen that. Maybe there's a model there. I don't know what it is. But here to break everything down, talk about the election, the House of Delegates, Ralph Northam, the new governor-elect, what seats are going to flip, who's going to get what jobs, and also Roy Moore is our good friend, Ben Tribbett. Ben, good to have you with us, man.
Good morning, John.
Ben, we had you on the day after the election. Obviously, you nailed this thing. You saw it coming better than probably anybody else did in America. But you look at the numbers that came out, now that we've had a chance to evaluate them. You look at some of these numbers, the Democrats winning Chesterfield County the first time, I think since 1929 or something. The Democrats winning Fairfax. You told me Tuesday morning they would have to win by 130. They won by 139. They had the same margins in Henrico as the city of Norfolk, unheard of. How on earth does a Republican win Virginia again with these numbers?
Well, I think part of this, John, is the national party branding. And I think what you see is the states where they used to have independent politics from national politics. And this is not just Virginia. This is almost every state in the country. Really, the state-level politics, the idea of being a Virginia Democrat or a Virginia Republican, that doesn't really exist anymore. It's all driven by national politics, and that's why you see, in 2009, the reaction to the first year of President Obama and the things that Congress was talking about at that point, Virginia being a very good indicator of what would come to the country in 2010. And I think you'll see the same thing here in 2017, where Virginia is going to be a very good indicator of what's coming to the country in 2018. And so for there to be a viable Virginia Republican Party, there has to be a viable national Republican Party.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I agree with you that this election was nationalized, no doubt, but Ed Gillespie tried to run a very localized campaign. He did talk about local issues. He did distance himself from Trump, but obviously that didn't work.
Right. I don't think that does work anymore. And frankly, I think that Ed Gillespie was, on one hand, keeping some distance from Trump, but on the other hand, embracing Trump and some of the things that Trump stands for. And, it would be an interesting model to see if a candidate had come out and actually completely rejected Trump on the Republican side, whether or not Republican base would have still shown up. It certainly would have been more appealing to independents, but would it have caused the base to fracture behind them? And you'll hear activists tell you, of course it would have. But you also, if you look at electoral history, will see there's a lot of John Warner types that do disavow the base, and the base will still come and vote for him because they're not a Democrat. So, we'll never know how that would have played out if Ed had done that. But clearly the strategy he used didn't work at all.
Well, about 1 year ago, you came on my show and you said, if you look at historical trends, the minimum gain the Democratic candidate is going to have over the 2016 election, you said the minimum gain was +5.
No, the minimum, the smallest there had ever been was actually 13.
Right, but you said that it could be 5 because things have changed.
Right.
And then at that time you said the minimum win the Democrat will have is 10. And you were spot on, it was 10. So that was the minimum. So you were absolutely correct in that. All right, let's get to the new incoming governor-elect, Ralph Northam. Politics aside, he's now the governor. He picks Clark Mercer as his chief of staff, who's been with him now with his term as lieutenant governor. Clark, a relatively young man as compared to who normally gets to be the chief of staff for a governor. He's in his early 30s, I believe. What did you think of that choice?
He's in his late 30s. He's actually, I think, the same age I am. But he's a great choice. I've known Clark since he was chair of the Alexandria Democrats. I think he understands the politics. He understands Ralph Northam. I think he's done an excellent job as Ralph's chief of staff as lieutenant governor. And, you know, I just think that it was a very good pick on the level of Clark's capability. I think it was an even better pick in terms of politics and how Ralph is going to be perceived. And John, let me talk a little bit more about that. You know, the worst thing that could have happened after this election would have been if Ralph Northam, after being elected, essentially became Terry McAuliffe term 2. And there's a whole host of very talented people in Richmond who have been working for Terry McAuliffe, and some of them will stay and some will go. But if Ralph was perceived as just telling everyone to stay that wanted to stay, and he would only fill positions that, you know, became open and became Terry McAuliffe term 2, I think it would be the sign of an unsuccessful governorship that was coming. I think for it to be successful, this needs to be Governor Northam's team, not the second term of Governor McAuliffe's team. And I think by making a change at the chief of staff and bringing in someone who Ralph trusts, I think he sends a message through the entire administration that this is going to be Ralph Northam's administration. And I think that was a message that badly needed to be sent and is a very good sign for Ralph going forward.
Well, I think it was a great choice because those of us that have worked with Clark Mercer, he's very affable. He's easy to approach. He talks to Republicans. He talks to people on the other side of the aisle. I mean, I talked with him during this campaign probably twice a week, just general information, banter. I've talked to him the whole time he's been Ralph's chief of staff. I assume if he talks to me, he talks to other people in the media and he talks to Republicans. And so I think he's a great choice. In his demeanor for that job is a 10. I mean, I never talked to Phil Reagan one time. If he jumped in my lap and called me daddy, I wouldn't know who the hell he is, okay? Never met him, never talked to him. Yeah, whatever his name is. I don't know him. That's Terry McAuliffe's chief of staff. I know Clark exceedingly well. He was also a star football player, went to college on a football kicking scholarship, so he's got that going for him. But I think it was a great choice, and I think it really opens up the door to having a lot of conversation and a lot of dialogue. So I agree with that. I don't think there's a better choice that Governor-elect Ralph Northam could have made. Let's get to the House of Delegates, Ben, where you've got, even if the recounts hold and David Yancey holds on, which is, who knows, right? We don't know. Even if he holds on, you got a 51-49 majority for Kirk Cox's majority leader. It would seem to me that the governor is going to offer a couple of these House members jobs in the administration in districts that they can easily flip with the climate and then give David Toscano control. Do you see that happening?
You know, I think that it's complicated by a couple of factors. First of all, I do think the Democrats will win this recount in Newport News. I think the history shows that Democrats are much more likely to fill out their ballot creatively, and in these recounts, that means when they're hand recounted that the Democratic candidate tends to pick up votes vis-a-vis the Republican. For example, John, if a voter doesn't follow the instructions and say, you know, maybe has reading comprehension issues, and they circle the candidates' names instead of fill in the bubbles, which I've seen in quite a number of recounts, in a optical scan machine that wouldn't be picked up, but when they hand recount it, the voter's intent will be clear and that ballot will count. And so because of that, and because you see that Mark Herring picked up, I think, 60 votes net in Newport News in the 2013 recount, I think that the Shelley Simmons is certainly the favorite, probably a 2-to-1 favorite going into the recount. Now, that would put the House at 50-50, and I think that the governor will have to make some strategic decisions of how he wants, how much he wants to intervene in the legislature versus how much he wants to let it be decided by the legislators. The reason being that David Toscano may have 50, or even after a special election, 51 Democratic votes, he doesn't have 50 or 51 votes for himself.
Really?
Remember that quite a number of these candidates that ran that were successful, the Democratic caucus blew off and would not support in this election. We also have a self-described Democratic socialist who was elected, Manassas, who looks that he will be very independent. And we can't forget about some of the ongoing feuds in the caucus, like the one David Toscano's had with Sam Rasool all year long from Roanoke. My point being, there is a very fractured Democratic caucus, one that I don't think is capable of governing at 51 seats at the moment, at least with David Toscano as the leader. And so without a more unifying leader, it just doesn't seem tenable. So I think that's something that the governor has to sort of calculate now, as to, would you rather have a 50-50 House, or would you rather have a dysfunctional 51-49 Democratic majority? And it may be, there's a lot of different maneuvers that could happen. It could be the governor appoints someone from a safely Republican seat to his administration before the start of the General Assembly to give the Democrats an operating majority on day one for the rules, but then, knowing that it will pop back to 50-50 in the legislature later. He has a lot of options at his disposal.
All right, so are you predicting that if they do indeed have a majority, that David Toscano will not be the Democratic Virginia House of Delegates Speaker?
I'm not going to predict that yet, because I think a majority of the caucus will want him to be. I think it's going to be very, very difficult for them to get everyone to vote for him. I think what will happen in the caucus is we'll hear speeches from a few of Toscano's allies saying, for whoever wins the majority of the caucus, everyone has to back. And the question is whether the Sam Rasools and the Lee Carters, and frankly these new candidates that David Toscano blew off of the world, are all willing to go walk off the plank and do that. And we'll see.
So let's get to the state Senate. A lot of people thinking also that you look at it and you say, well, maybe the governor-elect will choose Frank Wagner and give him transportation chairman or commerce, a position in his cabinet, transportation or commerce, get him out of the 7th district. That's in play. Likely in a special with the climate we saw, the Democrat would win that, thus giving them control of the Senate. Is that a possibility?
Sure, and I think that the governor probably would have less qualms about a Democratic majority in the Senate than the House right now, because it's not as dysfunctional in the Senate. There's differences in the caucus, but the Senate's certainly not dysfunctional under Senator Sasselow's leadership. So it seems like a good place to eye. Virginia Beach, the special there, that's not a guaranteed pickup by any stretch. The Republicans still do have a much deeper bench in Virginia Beach than the Democrats do. And so, in this environment, is that seat competitive in a special? Absolutely, but I would not put it down as a guaranteed Democratic pickup. I think the seats that would be more guaranteed Democratic pickups are less likely to be special elections. That would be Dick Black's seat in the Loudoun County area, and Glenn Sternowitz's seat in the Richmond area. I don't see either one of them joining the administration. And so Frank Wagner's seat is gettable for the Democrats, but it is also still a reach.
So how does this position Terry McAuliffe going into the 2020 Democratic presidential primaries?
One thing, it's a great story for him to tell in the Iowa caucuses in New Hampshire. He has a very good story to tell in terms of what he did as governor. Obviously, his record was very progressive, so that is going to be a big selling point in a primary. I think that his wins in this election, obviously, I think any governor, the success of their administration is partly judged on were they able to hand it off to someone like-minded after them. And Terry McAuliffe passed that test, and the pickups in the House of Delegates are extremely impressive. And it doesn't really matter whether or not he was responsible for it or not. It's going to be a fantastic story to tell. And I think it helps him. I also don't think it's guaranteed that he's running. I think there's a lot of balls that are still in the air. And so, I think that Terry certainly has an eye on looking at it, but I wouldn't say it's guaranteed that he'll be a candidate yet.
Why?
Well, I think there's a lot of factors in play. I mean, look, what if Hillary runs again, right? I mean, Terry's not going to primary her.
Right.
So there's still a lot of balls in the air. I think Terry's network is very much the Clinton network, and so we got to see, what candidate emerges from that network, and there could be multiple candidates that are coming out of that network, which would sort of spawn off of each other, and so there's a lot to play out here, and I think the same thing applies with some of these Bernie type of Democrats. If Bernie runs, they're not going to challenge him, but if he doesn't, you could see 3 or 4 younger versions from the Bernie movement jump in the primary and start cannibalizing each other. So it's still so early for the presidential.
Ben, who was the favorite right now?
Who's the favorite for the Democratic presidential nomination?
Yep.
Well, I mean, I would say it's Hillary if she wants to do it again. I think that she probably isn't going to do it again, but I think if she came out and said, I want a rematch, I think that she would be the favorite.
Well, she's not ruled it out, right? I mean, when asked several times, she didn't answer the question, so she's not ruled it out. Biden's not ruled it out. Bernie Sanders not ruled it out. So,
and I don't think it really matters if people rule it out anyway.
Yeah. Then they can just change their mind.
Barack Obama ruled it out multiple times after he was elected to the Senate, that it would be silly for him to run for president that quickly in the first 2 years in the Senate, and then as soon as we got through the midterms, he was a presidential candidate. So.
Right. So you never know, right, after the midterms. What seats do you think the Democrats, if any, are going to pick up in the Virginia midterms in the House?
When 2019?
2018.
Oh,
Congress.
In 2018. Sure. The 10th district, obviously, almost every precinct in it went Democratic. I think that actually leans towards a Democratic pickup right now. I wouldn't even call it a toss-up. The 2nd district, I think, still leans a little bit Republican, even though it voted Democratic in this election. But Scott Taylor is probably going to be sweating this election out. He's in for a late night in 2018, going to be competitive, especially if the Democrats can put a top-tier candidate against him. And Dave Bratt, whose district is obviously anchored in Chesterfield, Henrico, and the Richmond area, has to be very nervous looking at these results. I think because of his rural precincts, Ed Gillespie narrowly carried it, but that's a district that is moving out from underneath him, and Bratt, I think, is uniquely unpopular as well. And so those would be the 3 that I would watch the closest. The other one I would just put an asterisk on, even though it's a Republican advantage right now, is the 6th district, because anytime there's an open seat in this kind of environment, you just have to watch it closely.
There's 2 Republicans that have announced for that seat. It'll probably be decided in a convention in May. Cynthia Dunbar, she's a Republican State Committee woman and House of Delegates member who, Ben Klein. Mm-hmm. What do you see in that race?
Well, normally, and based on all the work that he did leading up to it, you would think Ben Klein was a prohibitive favorite. Mm-hmm. And that's in the Republican Party, they usually, hand off nominations in that manner. Obviously, we've seen that blow up in the last couple of years where the grassroots is actually naturally inclined against a candidate like that. So if I was going to go based on what we've been seeing around the country the last 2 years, Cynthia Dunbar is the favorite, only because Ben Klein has that established smell to him.
All right, we're out of time. I want to thank Ben Tribbett for being with us. You can follow Ben on Twitter at @NotLarrySabato, my favorite Twitter handle of all time, @NotLarrySabato. Hey, Ben, good to have you with us. Congratulations on being the #1 pundit in Virginia to get everything right. And it's always good to have you on, man. Thank you so
John.
much.